Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh. It's Friday. We are lucky. Matt Continetti in the house. Now, it's getting harder to introduce you, Matt. You're back in prison. You're at AEI today from your
I
cell
thought
at
we
AEI.
established, it's an East German spy cell here where I'm recording from.
The Stasi headquarters. Can we not get like a poster of Starry Night?
I'll bring in a plant for next week.
You've joined the Free Press. You're a Free Beacon columnist. Of course, you're on the Commentary podcast. You're the author of The Right. You've done a lot of history. This week is a market crash. And Marco Rubio said as much today, 10% correction, tariffs unsettled. I'm not a trader, so I don't get upset about these things. But I don't give market advice. And I've gone through 1999, 2001, 2008. Actually, I was working in the government in 1987 on Black Friday. How do you react to market upheavals like this?
Well, I mean, I think no one likes a market upheaval, but when you have the longer view, as you suggest, Hugh, you recognize that markets go through these periods, and then in the long run, there's no safer place than to invest in the United States. I liken this crash to not so much earlier stock market slides, like, say, in March 2020, when we went into lockdown and the market went south, but the Nixon shock of 1971, August 1971, when Richard Nixon announced his new economic policy, cutting off the connection between gold and the US dollar, imposing wage and price controls, and imposing some tariffs. That was a huge change in American economic policy initiated by a president in order to kind of turn over the playing board of the global economy. And I think that's what we're living through right now with President Trump.
Now, Matt, someone's got to speak up for the best case for the tariffs. So I'm going to try. And it happened this morning in the Financial Times, where they began by saying nations are rushing to make a deal with Donald Trump, whether it's on weapons purchases or actions against China or cutting their own tariffs. And it proceeds to lay out, and the Financial Times, pretty good newspaper, what Donald Trump was looking for was to reset the rules of the global economy, I think in a way that recognizes we're in Cold War 2.0. That we are not in the era after 1991 where we can afford to be everybody's rich relative and bail them out. We really have to reorganize into with us or with them. What do you make of that argument?
Well, I'm persuaded by that argument when we're dealing with China. And I think one difference between the trade war in Trump 1 and what we're seeing develop in Trump 2 is the scope of the tariffs. So in the first Trump administration in 2018, President Trump said, famously that trade wars are good and easy to win. And he started imposing tariffs primarily on China as an effort to decouple our economy from what is essentially a near peer competitor or an adversary to the United States, a challenger to the United States. What we have here is massive tariffs on China announced on Liberation Day. But we also have huge tariff increases on basically every other country on the world. And what I think Trump is doing here, and specifically with focusing on some of the Southeast Asian countries that have had high tariffs slapped on them this week, is he noticed that in the first trade war, when he imposed duties on products coming from China, the manufacturers just moved their production not to the United States, but to other low-wage countries close to China. And so in this effort, what he's trying to do is say, look, it needs to come back to the United States. You can't just move from China to Vietnam, say. You can't get around the tariff that way. We're going to have high tariffs everywhere in order to incentivize people moving production into the United States.
I agree with that. I also, and we'll talk about this during the break, I also think there's an opportunity here for people to sort of ally themselves unequivocally with the United States. I do not think President Macron of France did himself any favors by threatening Trump today. Do you think that's the way to approach Trump in the aftermath of the first Liberation Day announcement?
Well, I think we have 10 years of experience, Hugh, demonstrating that the way to approach President Trump is don't threaten him or attack him or call him names, but get on the phone and say, how can we work this out? Is there anything we can do? And there is the possibility, we'll see, there's the possibility that countries will do that in the coming weeks. And there may be some relief for some of our allies and other trading partners that are not China in the months ahead. At the same time, though, we should remember that President Trump believes in this policy. This is what he has wanted to do really since the 1980s, if not
Right,
before.
right.
And he's done
The,
it.
the hole in my theory is that he believed this a long time before China got into the WTO. I'll be talking to Matt during the break, then he'll be back on the radio stations on the Salem News Channel. Don't go anywhere. I'll be back with Matt Continetti. Stay tuned. So I'm back with segment 2 with Matt Continetti. Matt, if you believe we were going to be in a shooting conflict with China within the next 10 years over Taiwan or anything else, would you not want right now to get as much production in the United States of as much critical materials? In his Liberation Day speech, he mentioned antibiotics and shipbuilding specifically. Do you think that might be part of the motivation? Because Peter Navarro is his number one trade advisor. Peter wrote Death by China. I do think there's some China hawks, not just Mike Waltz, not just Peter Navarro, but a bunch of China hawks in the White House.
I think one thing that the pandemic showed was that we are sometimes at risk of dependency on China for critical products. And remember what we went through with masks, for the kind of base components of pharmaceuticals. We've seen that there are some strategic commodities that China has amassed over its rise in the past decades, and that America needs to figure out not only how we can have independence from China with those ingredients, but also our defense industrial base. Hugh, this is something that you and I have been talking about for a very long time. You can't be a superpower when your defense industrial base is as corroded as it's become. And so there are reasons that we should support policies that help reindustrialize the United States. I think when we look at Liberation Day, we should also recognize that there are huge duties on China. There's no question China was really hurt by Liberation Day, and that's one reason China retaliated this morning, levying tariffs on the United States. But duties were also imposed on Taiwan. And so I would probably go about it a little bit differently in preparing for any future conflict with China. I would try to work with the Taiwanese a little bit more diplomatically, say, than impose these tariffs on them. Again, kind of the harsh medicine that Trump uses on our allies again and again in order to get them to rearm, take on more of their own defense, and maybe also move some of those important chip factories to the United States.
And Matt, I do listen to commentary every day, and I often hear reference to Trump, the developer, is deeply embedded here. Every developer I worked for 27 years, when they would go into a county or a local jurisdiction, they would ask for density far more than they expected to end up with. You open with density of 10 per acre, and you end up settling with density at 3 per acre. If you're lucky, sometimes 2.5 per acre. I just think that is the part of the development code that maybe non-developers or non-professionals who work for developers aren't aware. Trump always opens hard. It's just who he is.
Yep. That's right. It is who he is. And I think one thing to keep in mind here is he's in a rush, too. Well, we have about 16 months before the midterm elections. And while the stock market is experiencing pain right now, Trump's bet is that these policies will work out to produce economic growth and rising median incomes for workers by election day 2026. And so, yeah, he's going big now, but we can't make any definitive judgment right now because we know that the policy is going to develop in unexpected ways before the midterm elections.
Yeah, it's a big, big bet. And you're absolutely right to characterize that. And Donald Trump is nothing if not someone who's willing to make them. Stay tuned. I'll be right back with Matt Continetti. We'll focus on the biggest story. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt with Matt Continetti. Continue our weekend review. Matt, the least reported and most important story, and I think it is the most important story no matter how much reporting it got, is the fact that we've parked a half dozen B-2s at least on Diego Garcia. A second carrier group has entered the Gulf that can hit Iran. We've deployed anti-missile batteries to Bahrain and other places in the near Iran, Middle East. And we've sent A-10s there, which are only useful in support of infantry or to deter infantry. It looks to me like Trump is serious about you open up and you denuclearize or we bomb. And I don't know that anyone's paying attention because of the tariffs in the markets. What do you think?
Yeah, Iran has definitely slipped under the radar. Of course, we're continuing our campaign against the Houthis, and some of the military assets that have been moving into the Gulf region are involved in that offensive as well. I think we're reaching a moment of decision with Iran. Hugh, President Trump announced earlier this spring that he had sent the letter to the Ayatollah Khamenei. That letter included a 2-month deadline for deciding what would happen to the Iranian nuclear program. It was unclear whether that 2-month deadline began with the receipt of the letter, or whether it began with direct negotiations. And the Ayatollah Khamenei has hedged. They refused direct negotiations. The Iranians are holding out the hope that Americans might be enticed into indirect negotiations like they had with the Biden administration. And President Trump is going to have to decide, does he want to repeat Biden administration foreign policy, probably to no good end when it comes to figuring out the end result, ending the Iranian nuclear program? Or is he going to finally say enough is enough? And I noticed, too, that he said just today, Hugh, that he is in talks with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu for perhaps another visit by Netanyahu to the White House in the coming week. That would be another, I think, sign that the president is serious about resolving this problem in the Middle East.
Let me play cut 6 for you so the audience. This is Donald Trump on Air Force One. I think yesterday, cut number 6.
So you mentioned Netanyahu recently. Israel has now talked about staying in Gaza, doing long-term occupation. Has anything changed in regard to the U.S. Gaza-Israel plans?
I spoke to him today, as a matter of fact. And I think he's going to be coming to our country sometime in the not-too-distant future, maybe next week. And we'll speak about Israel, and we'll speak about what's going on. That's another thing we'd like to get solved. And I think we will get it solved. But I think he very well may be coming next month.
All right, so that, Matt Continetti, whatever daylight opened between Israel and the United States is gone. And the new book, Fight, I don't know if you've read John Allen and Amy Parnes' new book, or seen the Netanyahu interview in Hebrew with Gowd. I think his name is Gowd. There was a lot of difference between Team Biden and Team Netanyahu. I mean, there were major disagreements on everything. I don't think we understood how big the gap was. Do you think we're finding out?
Yeah, we're beginning to find out with these new tell-alls from the Biden administration. But we also know, Hugh, that the Biden administration was slow-walking arms shipments to Israel, and the Biden administration was continually giving the Israelis bad advice. I mean, leading to the kind of pause in the campaign to go into the Hamas stronghold of Rafah and the Gaza Strip for months, that delayed the eventual destruction, the killing of Yahya Sinwar, the architect of the October 7th attack. So there was plenty of evidence that the Biden administration, while talking about its support for Israel in the abstract, was in fact holding Israel back and undermining the Israeli campaign against Hamas and then Hezbollah. That's not the case with the Trump administration. And now the real question is Trump decided that it is time to set the Iranian nuclear program back indefinitely?
I hope it is. 2 scandals this week, and we'll cover one now and one during the break, and we'll be done. I'll let you go. Thank you, Matt, for your time. First scandal is, in the book Fight, it is revealed President Biden's cognitive impairment was serious, first noticed by Kevin McCarthy in late 2022, echoed by Eric Swalwell in early 2023. It got worse. Everybody knew. Do you think we'll get an accounting, Matt Continetti, on who knew and what they knew and how ill-served we were by these group of people?
We're beginning to. I saw that Ron Klain, one of Biden's closest advisors and a former chief of staff, is beginning to kind of tiptoe toward recognizing that Biden was in decline during his presidency. But, when we look at these headlines, Hugh, and we have to remember that the media and Democratic elites and the expert class all said that Biden was fine. and that if you questioned Biden's state 4 years ago, you were marked for cancellation. So I have to say that the way in which the media covered up for Biden does make me raise an eyebrow when I hear the uniform chorus of experts say that Trump's policy on trade is going to end in utter disaster. This group of experts are wrong. They're almost always wrong. And so one lesson I take away from the Biden experience is we really have to look at what the Beltway class says with a huge dollops of salt.
I gave a talk earlier this week. Gallup has been doing the same poll about trust in the U.S. media for 70 years. In 1972, 70% of Americans trusted media. Today, it's 30%. I don't think it's ever going back to 70%. Can we get it back to 50%, Matt Continetti?
No, I don't think we can, Hugh. And well, look, I mean, we're not going to go back to the country that we were in 1972 either. And in some ways, that's a very good thing. It means that we have a proliferation of different media sources we can turn to, and that the official story, which you often hear promulgated from the mainstream media, does face challenge from alternative media. And I think that is a good thing, even if it means most Americans seriously distrust the mainstream media.
Stand by, America. I'm going to talk with Matt during the break, then I'll play it in the last segment on the Salem News Channel and across the radio network, because I got to talk to him about the border. I'm going to be on Brian Kilmeade's show tomorrow night, and I want to amplify a story that Chuck Grassley brought my attention to. Good old Chuck Grassley. He has not lost a step. Stay tuned. I am back from my last chat with Matt Continetti. Matt, Chuck Grassley gave a floor speech this week, said there's a new IG report from the Department of Homeland Security that shows during the Biden years, 448,000 unaccompanied minors crossed the border that we know about. Doesn't count the people that we don't know about, but we know that 448,000 people under the age of 18. 31,000 of those we never even got an address for. 48,000 got given a notice to show up at a hearing that they didn't show up for. 223,000 didn't get a hearing scheduled. It's almost mind-boggling how many children we turn loose in an America full of predators on children. Have you seen this story? I mean, Chuck Grassley's the only guy I saw mention it. I went and found the IG report. It's written in standard IG. You can't possibly make this interesting style, but it's shocking to me that we did that.
Yeah, and I hope more attention is paid to this story. And let's not forget, too, that the folks trafficking these kids were the narcos, were the human traffickers, were the drug traffickers. And so oftentimes children are exploited as drug mules, for example. So it's just a large, caravan of human misery that the Biden administration allowed to come into the country for 4 years unchecked. And
now,
that's, I think, why... Mm-hmm.
I've always dismissed the Cloward-Piven theory as classic radical left chic that no one took seriously. But I don't know if anyone intended to do it. But they just did overwhelm the system. There was no dealing with what Biden... And then Trump turned around and closed it, proving that it could have been closed. 1 minute, Matt.
No, exactly. This was Trump's signal achievement in his first 3 months in office. He has shut the border down. Border crossings are at historic lows. And the immigration agenda of this administration is popular, and the public approves of it. And it's one reason, Hugh, that I think his approval ratings are still in that narrow band, hovering at around 50%, and why the public is willing to give Trump some leeway on trade policies, for example, because they've seen what he's been able to achieve on the border, and they are for what he's achieved on the border.
We'll check back. And John Ellis thinks those numbers have dropped this week, but we'll check back in a couple of weeks to find out. Matt Continetti, thank you. Follow him on X at Continetti. Listen to him on the Commentary Pod. Read him at the Free Press and the Washington Free Beacon.